know. Yeah, so we're trying to figure out IAM style authentication, at least have a clean story around it before pinging Tim again.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there was some deadlines. Let's see. Yeah, there's a code freeze deadline coming. I think it's, what day is that? Code freeze 16th, November 16th, and then there is this deadline, November 23rd. That is basically for us to submit some entry to show up in the major things for 1.23 release. But yeah, so let's see if we can get it in before that, because otherwise we can't add this to the major themes. I like this one to show up as in the release blog.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so yeah, let's try to hit that deadline. We have about what, 12 days now.
We still have a couple of weeks, but then it's holidays, right? So
Right.
yeah.
Nobody's gonna, yeah. Okay, so yeah, let's start off today. So in terms of the overall plan, if we figure out workload identity based authentication, if we have a clean story around it, I think things will move very fast, because that was the big thing that Tim wanted addressed. It seemed very important for Google Cloud, and I would presume other cloud providers also would say the same thing. So far, we've mostly had vendors, non-cloud vendors, making progress on this, and for us all, I would think access key, secret key based authentication is the easiest step. Sometimes we run in air gapped environments, so um, you know these tokens are good enough for us. But in places like Google Cloud, where it's public, I can understand why they would be more focused on more advanced types of authentication. So yeah, let's get this figured out, and we'll get back to Tim again, and we should be able to make it this time. All right. So I spent some time trying out workload identity based authentication, and here, let's see. Yeah, so it's very straightforward. It's what we guessed it works like last week when we were talking. So what I would like to do is explain how this works, and I think this will help us model the API and answer some of the questions we had last week much better. So what Kubernetes does or what GKE does, Google Kubernetes engine does, is first you have to enable something called workload identity. But they recommend that all Kubernetes clusters that are run by GKE enable this. If there are workloads that talk to the GKE itself or Google Cloud itself, for example, like buckets. So what it does is it creates IAM account for every service account that you create. So basically, if a pod runs as a particular service account, then that pod uh, is mapped to a particular identity inside Google Cloud. And if that identity has the permissions to access a bucket, then this pod also gets permissions to access the same bucket. Um, so there's a lot of text around it, but that's basically what I just explained is basically what happens. Okay, so once you enable it, I want to quickly show you something. Yeah, you can enable it. By default, it's GC metadata, otherwise it's GK. What this means is um, there is something called as a metadata service that runs whenever you're running in the cloud. You can query the metadata service, and based on who the source is that's querying it, the result is given according to that. So if I'm querying from node 1 and I ask for node name, it will say node 1. If I'm querying from node 2 and ping the same API, ask for the node name, it'll say node 2. So when you enable workload identity, then the workload metadata gets set to something called GKE metadata. If not, it gets set to GC metadata. This GKE metadata is important if you want to do workload identity style authentication. The GKE metadata is the metadata service that understands the mapping between service accounts in Kubernetes and IAM accounts in Google Cloud. Okay, so that was that piece of information is important, um, even though it's slightly tangential. So once it's created, what you can do is uh, let me see. Yeah, you can just put take a service account that you created and provide it to a pod, and the pod can query the metadata service, metadata flavor equals Google, and it can just query it, and when it queries it, it gets response accordingly. So yeah, so you get service accounts, and let's see, all the GKE or Google Cloud SDKs already know how to work with this. So if you take any of the SDKs for talking to Google storage buckets, um, they would just be able to talk. If you already mapped the service account to the IAM account for the bucket, then any SDK that's built by Google will just know how to use this. Um, yeah, this is what the metadata service looks like. These are the APIs it supports. um, so if we were to create a pod, and using that pod, if we were to query something like this, then any of these APIs, you would get the right um, account tokens or whatever to yeah, this is the token, um, to actually talk to the backend. There is one limitation. I can go over it, but so basically the access model is you have an IAM account and you enable workload identity to map that IAM account to a service account Kubernetes, and if a pod runs with that service account, it has access to the backend. That's it.
Hey, sorry, I came in late.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a question in
Mm-hmm.
terms of provisioning.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that means when you provision a bucket, you need to provision it with using that identity as the owner of the bucket.
Oh,
Is that right?
no. So bucket lifecycle and identity lifecycles are independent. So bucket need not be provisioned with owner. The organization under which the bucket falls into, that's the owner of the bucket.
So then but how do you give access to this service account? Like you need to be able to configure the bucket to say like this service account can access it.
Right. So there has to be an admin user, a user with admin level permissions. It can be a service account, or it can be a real user, and they would have admin permissions to update and create IAM roles and IAM identities, um, and they would have to create a service account in Kubernetes, and there is a way Google Cloud provides to map the Kubernetes service account to the service account in Google Cloud. And once that mapping is done, it's somewhere here. Yeah, so you create a service account, IAM service account like that, and then you add, oh yeah, you create IAM policy binding, and the policy binding binds the Google Cloud service account to the Kubernetes service account.
So to be bit clear, like the COSI does not have a load over here, right? It should be managed by admin.
Well,
something.
no. Okay, so that is also so. Let me go over the life cycle. So bucket provisioning will happen through COSI, where it'll create a bucket. COSI, in order to run it, it needs some privileges to do it, and we expect COSI to run as an admin that can create buckets and also provision access for those buckets. So provision um, credentials for that bucket. So Cozy's job here would be to create this IAM policy binding, which will bind a service account in Kubernetes to a IAM account in Google Cloud. And once that binding is done, mount this service account into the pod that's requesting access. And now that pod will have access to talk to the bucket.
So I think, does that mean in terms of provisioning, we need to have some parameter for the pod service account that we want the provision on behalf of?
Yeah. So or we create the service account from scratch rather than reuse something existing. I'm not sure. That's what we need to discuss right now.
Yeah, I would look at so actually CSI, we just added an equivalent feature called CSI service account token, where basically, well, this doesn't happen at provisioning time, but it happens at mount time. But during the mount call, we pass in the pod service account. So potentially for Cozy, there could be some equivalent kind of thing, at least at the time when we modify or set the access policies.
Right. That's exactly when we would need it. So is this something that's going to happen at node stage volume or like node publish volume in CSI?
Yes, in CSI it happens during node publish.
I see. And is this is this meant for, like, how is it used?
So this is meant for, there's some CSI drivers that are actually like secret stores. So like there's a CSI driver that basically acts like Kubernetes secrets, but it actually gets the secrets from Vault or an external secret manager. And so what happens is when the pod does a mount, we pass in the pod service account to the CSI driver, and then the CSI driver can authenticate to Vault using the pod service account token.
Makes sense. So
but I think it's a little different for the Cozy
Yeah.
one, right? For Cozy, we'll want it earlier at the time that we set up the access policies.
Right. So so far the model we've been following is Cozy would have a static set of credentials, which would be like getting admin privileges across the board to create buckets, to do everything related to buckets, rather than a particular service account or a particular key for that particular operation. So doesn't CSI also have something like that, where when a new volume needs to be provisioned, say from the cloud, the CSI driver's controller would have permissions to talk to the cloud, say if you're on Amazon, create EBS drives, and also attach them to the nodes that you wish them to be attached to.
Yes, right? That is the same model. I think the main difference here is that object storage, and I think that's still the same, right? I think
the authentication
the Cozy driver still needs to sort of have admin privileges to manage the buckets. But I think one more aspect to it is adding additional owners or access to the buckets.
Yeah, exactly. So another question I have, and I'm not sure about this. So is it okay to create new service accounts each time a pod wants access to a bucket, or should we latch on or add permissions to an existing service account? The reason I asked this question is, if we were to create our own service accounts, and if the user wanted a different service account for their pod for whatever reason, wouldn't we be conflicting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is better to have like it could be as part of provisioning, like we require the user to give us the service account that they want to use for that.
Yeah, sorry, provisioning or during workload creation?
I think during whenever sorry, I forgot the latest, but we have like an API for access control. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Access policies.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe as part of that
Yeah.
access policies API, we also have a field to say, hey, here's a service account to like allow access to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's where I would think it goes to. Okay, so we take service account as an input, and then we do the cozy magic to do the IAM policy binding, and the service account goes back into the pod.
I would also one thing to clarify, the cozy magic to do the binding. I assume that would have to be done by the driver,
Yeah,
and not like a generic cozy component. Okay.
yeah. So the cozy's role here would simply be to let the driver know, I want you to do the IAM binding to a service account rather than give me access and secret keys. So this is where we left off the discussion last week.
Last
and
week,
we,
like,
Mhm.
yeah, so last week it was kind of a decided like the driver will provide everything and the application or like it can pick up whatever it wants, right? Something
Yeah,
like that. If driver,
I'll explain what Jeffen is saying here. So one of the so this is the overall architectural workflow we decided, just what we just said now. The service account comes in as an input or something like this earlier. The service account comes in as an input, and Cozy does the binding of the service account to a cloud using the driver service account to a cloud entity, and the service account goes into the pod, and the application is presumed to have the necessary facilities to use this service account based authentication. And as far as official cloud SDKs are concerned, now all of them support this style. If you're using a vendor SDK, that is not the case. So if you are moving from on-prem to cloud, and let's say you were using Minio, now you're moving to Google Cloud. I mean, they're incompatible protocols, S3 versus GCS. But let's say Google Cloud suddenly started supporting S3. Minio's SDK will not know how to talk to Google Cloud's metadata service to leverage this service account style authentication. So that's one limitation to know of, which is, I mean, the whole point of this is portability. And we say we allow portability as long as the protocols are the same, but we are adding another, star to it, saying disclaimer to it, saying that we allow portability as long as the protocol is the same, and the access mechanisms are supported by or are understood by the SDK. So there is this reliance on the application SDK's facilities here, and we want to model that in the API somehow. We want to model this in the API where we say, here are the authentication mechanisms this driver provides, or this particular environment provides, and there needs to be some explicit contract to denote that, or we can even, it's up for discussion, I would say. So say for instance, there is a client, there is an application that requests access to the bucket. The first question is, should it be able to say, hey, I want access key, secret key style authentication, or should it be completely transparent to that workload? So a developer who's creating the workload, should they be able to say, here's the style of authentication I would need for my workload? Anyone, if they have any thoughts, feel free to pitch in. The second question, since it's silent, I'm going to go to the second question. If it's not the application that says, hey, I want workload identity versus access key secret key, maybe this field should be a part of the bucket class or the bucket access class.
I guess since this does require like the application to have the right SDK, like I'm okay putting it at the application level API
Mm-hmm.
because
Right, that's
it's something they have to like consciously be aware of.
So
right.
even
Jiffin, you were saying, right?
yeah, even I
Last
agree
week we
that
had a go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't know, like last week we don't know the input part, right? So this has a dependency from the user to provide the service account, right? So in case of access key and secret key, user don't want to provide anything, but we can automatically mount that information to the port. But here we are expecting user to give the service account details, right? Like it is expected from the user part, right? So we are
Yeah,
giving that field for that. Uh,
yeah,
so
yeah. So one of the arguments last week was, and this is a good argument really. Um, if we want to be portable, and if we had this particular requirement on an authentication style, um, we wouldn't really be portable because you'd have to change the authentication style when going to a different environment. Um, so shouldn't and we do the same with like PVCs and PVs, where the PVC doesn't say um, what kind of file system is going to be on the PV. That's a configuration that comes from the storage class. Similarly, PVC doesn't also say whether it's a read write once or read write many type of volume. Again, that comes from the storage class. That's one of the ways PVC stays um, portable.
Oh, sorry, I think read write many is on the
PVC.
PVC object.
Okay, I might be mistaken there then. Um, oh, really? Huh.
Yeah, I mean, but that so like that also requires like application awareness, right? Like a application specifically has to request if they want like a read write once or a read write many because it will impact the way that they deploy their application.
Right. Because sometimes you'll need to do write locking if you're using NFS or something.
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. So, huh. That is confusing to me because what if I were to move between a provider that allows read write many versus another that doesn't?
Yeah, that I mean that's it is a problem, right? Like in with PVCs and PV today, we have a bunch of we do have a bunch of features that are dependent on the volume driver to support, like
Mm-hmm.
snapshots, for instance. Like if
Mm-hmm.
not all drivers support snapshots, so if someone creates a PVC and then takes a snapshot and tries to take a snapshot, but the driver doesn't support it, they'll get some error or something. But like they don't really know unless they've read the driver documentation to see what it supports.
Interesting. Okay. So PV portability is dependent on multiple things. Then it's dependent on yeah, well, actually just one, which is read write many or volume mode. It's portable as long as the volume mode is supported by the driver, right?
Correct.
Okay, understood. Okay, interesting. So if we were to put the authentication mechanism, okay, so that argument would also apply for the protocol then, S3 or GCS. And so far the argument for protocol has been that it should be in the class object, should be something that the admin sets based on the driver. um, I'm trying to remember why we made that decision. Jeff, do you remember? Um,
Sid, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
so the question is, why did we decide to put protocol inside of the class? I know we went back and forth on that a few times.
Yeah, we did go back and forth. And at one time we thought it was a list of protocols in the class, and the BR, the bucket request, could just name one of them. And then we went away from that idea. It's a fair question, because the driver that you define in the class implies a protocol. So I don't know. I think it would just seem like it was an obvious attribute, and maybe that was all the thought it was given.
Okay, so in the KEP we had some notes about it. Yeah, we will know why we put it there. But the reason we are going back to protocol is because this authentication style isn't very different from the protocol field. Yeah, protocols are not file systems. The bucket is not formatted a class. So yeah, we had protocol inside of the developer controlled resource, and Tim was suggesting the protocol should go into the class, and his reasoning was a class represents the provider plus parameters. The provider has intrinsic support or non-support for protocols. No need to list protocols. Okay, this field also works the same way. May want to list protocols in bucket class, but even that seems overkill to start. We can always add to the API. We can never take it away. Interesting. Okay, so any thoughts about this argument that Tim is making? So all he says is a field like protocol, something that is intrinsic to the provider or the driver, should not go into a user defined resource.
I guess though
Oh, go ahead.
the application.
Jeff, can you mute?
Sorry, the application needs a specific protocol, right? Because the application has to like include a specific SDK.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I kind of feel like it's like if say you import say like a G Cloud GCS SDK, but then you go to an environment where you only have S3, like I assume the application has to know that the provider can't support it somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean this is one of the challenges with trying to go off the PVC approach, or trying to retrofit some of the things we did with PVCs and object storage. The data API is different between different providers. With PVCs, it's always POSIX, or PVs, it's always POSIX. Read write calls are the same regardless of who's providing the file system or block device to you. And in this case, there's two things: data API changes like S3 versus GCS, and also this authentication mechanism to talk to the backend changes. That being said, so far we've modeled this as if those details are always hidden from the user. The admin is expected to provide the user with a storage class name, and this storage class is assumed to always provide a bucket that the user expects. So if the user expects S3 buckets, then the storage class is supposed to provide some S3 compatible bucket that might be from any vendor, could be from AWS or any other vendor out there. That's kind of the model we've been following.
I mean, one reason to have protocol in the bucket class is for drivers that support multiple protocols. Then the driver could the sidecar can pass the protocol down to the driver, so the driver knows which protocol it's speaking.
But I guess does the driver care which protocol? Like, is there actually different things the driver would do if the protocol changes? Because I assume the driver like creates an endpoint and the endpoint can support any of the protocols.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So sorry, are we discussing about? Hey Jeff, there's a lot of echo.
Okay, I'm muted now.
Wait, how did you say that? If you're muted. Okay. Anyways, um, so are we talking about having one driver support multiple protocols?
Yes, I think that was the scenario that Jeff was talking about.
Well, that's what I was saying. I think that's a lower probability use case, but it is possible, and Google may do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, GCS supports both GCS and S3.
Oh, okay.
We did have a thought, Michelle, when at one point the bucket class had a list of protocols, and what we decided for simplicity is that in the case, say, of Google, and they support multiple protocols, you would just define multiple classes so that we were doing one class per protocol, even if the cloud provider.
But I guess now it's like is it a list versus like a single field?
Yeah.
Or no field?
Now it is a single field, and I think what we're discussing is, do we need it at all in the bucket class?
No, that's not. I don't want to get distracted. So the bigger question is, do we do the same for authentication model or not? I don't know if we should go back and question the protocol argument yet, unless we have a strong case for choosing not to have or having a list. And the same argument would, whatever we decide for authentication method would apply to protocol as well. But I can see that these two being symmetric, I would say.
Yeah, so I think my thoughts, sorry, I have to leave early, but I think my main thoughts are that like the higher goal we want to achieve is an application wants to request like a specific protocol and authentication mechanism, and the driver needs a way to say if it supports it or not. From an API perspective, I don't know if having a field in the bucket class is necessary for that. Like, you could just pass the parameters down to the driver and the driver could return an error. That's sort of my 2 cents on this.
Cozy needs to do some orchestration based on the authentication mechanism you ask for. So if you ask for access keys and secret keys, Cozy would request for that, create a secret object out of it, and mount that secret into the pod when it starts up. If it's a service account, it does it differently. So
yeah, I mean, that's fine. I'm saying like, I think it's fine if like in the bucket object, there's like some field there for authentication method. What I'm, I guess, not clear on is whether or not you actually have to have a field in the bucket class. And I'm thinking you don't.
Okay, to denote if to denote the authentication mechanism, you mean?
Yeah.
Interesting. And you're saying that would just be defined in the bucket request object, something that the user requests, right?
Yeah, and it would basically just get passed through to the driver, and the driver can error if it doesn't support it.
So question of portability here, is that a concern at all here? Like, based on this approach, can we is there a concern with this approach? Not is portability important, but more like, does this in this model, if you wanted to move from an environment that allows authentication mechanism A to an environment that doesn't allow it or doesn't support it, are we now not portable?
I mean, yeah, but I think you can argue that this is similar to like any like volume feature we have today, right? Like you could be using volume snapshots in one environment and move to another environment where snapshots doesn't work. So I think it's a similar boat. I think what maybe the important part is like, if say the feature capabilities were equivalent on both environments, can you still use the same API?
Yeah.
So I guess the difference between this and the snapshots is snapshots like optional, right? Like protocol, everybody has to specify some protocol, right? So this is like a required field.
The authentication method could be required, but like it can default to, something else.
The easiest one, access keys and secret keys. Yeah. Yeah, I like this actually. It's a very simple and it's similar to how PVCs work with volume modes. All right, so let's revisit what the decision from last week was. Jiffin, do you remember what we decided?
So last week, like the decision was to like a driver is the holder, like says it can support lot of protocols, and when the application is mounted with a bucket claim, the driver will give all the information on the pod or the application, like for example, in this case for identity base it will be the service account, for the secret and access key it will be saved in a file like that, and the application can pick any one of it, like if it
Oh, I
needs,
see.
it's like that.
But was there any representation of the authentication mechanism in the class objects or in the bucket request or bucket access class or bucket access request objects?
Okay, let me check the notes. Like I guess I have written something. Okay. Yeah, the storage class have the list of authentications, and driver can pick the authentications from the list, something like
I
that.
see. Yeah, that seemed a little weird to me.
So yeah, that's a decision which was discussed last week.
Yeah, for the sake of portability or for the sake of saying that it is portable, we were kind of going down this road where we were saying, oh, we'll list everything that this application supports or this driver supports. The driver is free to choose one. I would think that is even less deterministic than not having the field at all.
So I guess it's better to check with Tim again. Like, can you ask him? Like, I don't know, like where
Yeah,
he sees the authentication, like whether it's in glass or like whether it is on the COSI driver or whether it's on the
I mean,
application.
yeah. So the way he's thinking about it, you can see in this comment itself. He says even having the protocol in the bucket class seems overkill. Um, he's thinking about just transparently passing it through, like Michelle was suggesting. So we don't even need to represent it anywhere, either the class or the user. Well, in the user object somehow, and just pass it along. So how would that look like? Michelle, do you have any thoughts on what that would look like? How the user would say, "This is the authentication mechanism that I want."
She dropped out.
Okay. So yeah, so that is something that we need to figure out. How would the bucket access look like when they say I want access keys or secret keys versus when they say I want IAM? So who's here on the call?
We still have bucket access class, right? It's still there, right? Can the authentication be, so protocol is the highest level, like at least for me. And the authentication is the next level under protocol, right? So as current approach, the protocol will be staying on storage class. And can we have something on the bucket access class saying authentication mechanism will be part of this, like this authentication, like this bucket class, I mean bucket access class supports this authentication, and all the bucket requests created from that bucket access class will have that authentication or something like that.
I see. Yeah. So what you're saying is you want to define on the bucket itself that these are the authentication mechanisms supported. Is that what you're saying?
I mean the bucket access class or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So that is what we discussed last week, right? That we'd have a list of authentication mechanisms written down in the class object. And
that's bucket class, right? Like, I mean, there's two, like there's bucket class and bucket access class, right? Or like bucket request class, I don't know.
So I don't know if it makes sense to put it in the bucket class because authentication is separate from the bucket lifecycle. As in, to the same bucket,
yeah,
you could have a, sorry?
I am not, sorry, like I'm not referring to bucket class even. I don't think it won't be part of the bucket class. So there's bucket access class, right? Or BAC, which is the life, like which represents the life cycle for the authentication, right? Basically, it's not the life cycle of the bucket. It's different from.
Right. So you're saying we would specify the authentication mechanisms, like multiple in there. Is that what you're saying? Or just one?
Just one, like something.
Okay. So yeah, that's what we were talking about just now. And what Michelle seems to think is maybe we don't even need to specify it there. Why?
Hey, Sid, I'm confused. I'm looking at your cap. Looks like the protocol right now is in the bucket request spec. And then team has a comment. They're saying, I thought this moved to class. Is this a,
yeah.
What is the current state?
No, we want to move.
I thought now we're talking about moving from the class to the bucket request, but it's already there. So, I mean, I'm confused.
We're moving to class, Shing. So,
but Michelle was just saying that it should not be in the class, right? That's what she was talking about earlier.
So what Tim is saying is, if you're going to have it, we should have it in the class. What Michelle is saying is, why even have it in the class? We don't need it. So Michelle's thinking we can pass it as a parameter in the bucket request object.
That's what we have right now, right? In your current cap.
Yeah, yeah. So these two are completely opposite of what each other is saying, right? Like Tim wants it either in the class. No need to list protocol in the bucket request. So he doesn't want the request. May want to list protocol in the bucket class. He's okay with putting in class, but he sees even that is overkill to start. So yeah, we need to there's no wrong answer here. It's just different styles. I would rather go with what Tim is saying right now, because Tim has been more involved. He knows this more deeply. So going by this, we would have a list of authentication mechanisms in the bucket access class object. If we were to go this route of how Tim is thinking about it. Similar to protocols, we'll have authentication mechanisms, and that would be in the class object. And when someone wants access to a bucket, they would refer to the class object, and based on what we spoke last week, we said, yeah, so that part is still confusing to me. So first, before we go there, Shing, does it make sense? Is whatever we talked about just now?
No? Keep it in the class?
Yeah, keep it in the class.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I was just thinking this is a different because Michelle was using snapshots as example, I thought this one is like everybody has to specify this, and then does has this portability issue, I think, if it's in the spec.
Right, exactly. If it's in the class, then it's not there. The portability is easier. My only concern here is, you know, an application also plays a role here. Unlike with PVCs and PVs, or unlike with snapshot, the application has a role to play here. If it is an S3 bucket, then you know, the application needs to have an SDK that knows how to talk to S3. The GCS bucket, the application needs to have that too. So,
Right. Right. So this is the whole problem, that we don't have a POSIX standard for bucket access. And so the SDK is defining the protocol inherently, and the application uses the SDK, and Cozy has no idea what SDK an application is using, that a workload uses. So there's always a chance, no matter what we do, no matter where protocol gets defined, or no matter how a driver name is used, that the application is out of sync with the underlying bucket, right? And I don't know how we can prevent that.
yeah, I don't know if we can. I mean, we could do one thing where you know, we create a 3 different bucket types. Like it's not just bucket. There's no bucket anymore. I'm just like hypothetically going there. I don't know if we should even go down this route. But one possible solution is to standardize 3 different types of buckets: S3 bucket, GCS bucket, and Azure buckets. That way, there's no single, you know, generic bucket. It's just one of these 3. And you can't go down anymore.
It is, I mean, I don't know if we want to go down there either, but one advantage of what I hear you say is that it's honest. It acknowledges that there's not portability between the different bucket types.
Right. I'm saying maybe the abstraction isn't bucket itself, but rather bucket, the specific type of bucket.
Yeah.
That would solve this problem actually. That would solve this this problem with you know, needing the application to define the data protocol. But I don't even know if we need it, because see, if you look at the other resources in Kubernetes, say let's see, say services. Services only behave in one way, right? They just route your request to one of the pods. Or let me try and remember this. Does service do TCP level load balancing? Yeah, it does, because it's in IP tables, huh? Let me think about a different resource where there could be a possible mismatch. I think we need to, looking at how PVCs do it, looking at how PVC models the volume mode, because application needs to know if a volume is read write many or read write once. The PVC allows you to specify the volume mode. Shouldn't our bucket access request, or bucket access now, but that's what we're calling it now, model authentication mechanism, because it's very application centric. Does that make sense? So you know, when I think about it more, I feel like we should we should go down the path that Michelle is suggesting. It seems to me like it is better to have protocol and what is that authentication mechanism in the bucket access object. Well, protocol would be in the bucket request, and authentication mechanism would be in the bucket access object. And then we would have perfect portability, right? Okay,
That's
so yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
well, I just saying I agree with your division, the separation of the protocol, if that ends up being defined, being on the bucket creation side, and the access being in the bucket and authorization or token mechanism being in the BAC BAR side. That seems natural.
Yeah. So Jeff, I'm hearing an echo. So yeah, no, it's gone. So where do we put it though? The question is, should it be in the class object or should it be in the user controlled object? And as I think about it more, I think it should be in the user controlled object. It should be in the bucket request for protocol and bucket access for the authentication mechanism.
If we move more of these properties into the user objects, then you start losing the value of having the classes, I think.
How do you?
Well, then a class really just has a driver name and parameters, a map maybe.
Deletion policy.
Yeah, good point, Shing.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're right, Shing.
Yeah, so class would be provider plus parameters for that provider. Except here the application is involved, right? So my reason for not putting it in the class is because there is a role for the application to play here, and that should be modeled somehow, right? Or are we saying like it can't be in the class, right? This class is admin controlled. The application is developer controlled.
Right. That's the conflict, Sid, is the workload picks an SDK, which we know nothing about. So they are involved in this.
Yeah, that's what's making me think maybe we should go down this path of saying that protocol, remain. So what Michelle is saying is very similar to what I just said, but with another step further. She's saying don't even model it. Don't even have protocol in the as a separate field, or don't even have authentication mechanism as a separate field. Just pass it through blindly.
Right. That does make some sense to me.
Well, now that I think about it, even that might not be such a good idea. Like if because then we'll have vendors creating their own specialized protocols. So Minio won't do this, but we might let's say Minio creates its own Minio protocol, which is basically S3, but we just call it Minio. And then now we're suddenly not portable between Minio and S3. We would never do that. It makes no sense. But I'm just saying, we would we might. I mean, this is what Saad was worried about initially when we were discussing about having an opaque set of fields inside the bucket request or in the user control resource. And we said that's not a good idea because we would end up with vendors implementing their own proprietary ones.
So omitting protocol altogether, it's not in a BR, it's not in a BC, addresses that issue, doesn't it?
So how would you model it then? Shouldn't it be specified somewhere? Tim is saying no, just to be clear.
If it matters, the driver can return the protocol.
Okay, and what about authentication then? Same story?
Maybe. I need more time to think about it.
Yeah, I feel like maybe if we write it down and maybe wrote down thoughts about it, it'll be clearer.
Right, I agree. Shing had mentioned that in our last meeting, that if we could get something written down, we could post the link to SIG Storage Cozy, and then we have some ability to digest it better, think, do a little research, and make comments. But
Okay, let's
verbally
do
like this, it's all, you know, we hear it and there's a recording, but it's hard to give it a lot of thought, I think.
I agree. Okay, so I will take up that burden because I want to write it down just even for myself. Um, and yeah, let me give it a try. Let me see what thoughts come up when I write it down. Maybe, you know, things will get clearer.
That sounds great, Sid.
Okay, and I posted on SIG storage, Cozy. Yeah. All right. So I look forward to your feedback there. I think if we just figure this out, we should be in a good shape, and we can convince Tim to push this along.
Yes.
That's it. That's it, everyone.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Jeffrey,
you.
were you saying something?
So I have a question, like if you have 2
Yeah.
minutes.
Go ahead.
So I should have asked this before. Like you have mentioned how the authentication, I mean, IAM identity authentication works for GCS, right? So
Mhm.
will it be the same for S3 as well, or like
It's
I
very
mean the
similar.
similar
Yes.
concept? Yeah,
It uses
like
the
but
metadata service. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Like it, you also have the service account and it need to bind to a account in the,
Yeah.
I mean, something like that.
Yes.
Okay.
That part is almost exactly the same. Yes.
Okay, sure. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Sure. Bye.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shing. Thank you,
Bye.
Jeffrey. Yeah. Bye.